A fragile farewell. Matilda Stevens had just turned 7 when the world she knew crumbled around her. Her mother, Martha, who filled their small house with the warmth of her laughter, was suddenly gone. Matilda's father, Richard, sat her down one morning, his eyes red-rimmed and his voice trembling. "Matilda, darling," he whispered, "Mommy is in heaven now. Do you understand what that means?" Matilda nodded hesitantly, her small hands clutching the hem of her dress. But as the words sunk in, her tiny frame quaked, and she burst into uncontrollable sobs. All she could manage through her tears were desperate questions. Why did she leave? When can I see her again, Daddy? Why? But Richard, like everyone else, had no answers. Martha had been vibrant, healthy, and full of life. Her sudden passing baffled even the medical experts, and the coroner's report provided no clarity. Despite his own heartache, Richard held Matilda close and promised to protect her, though he felt powerless against the growing cloud of mystery. The closed coffin. Martha's funeral was delayed by a week due to special circumstances. When the day finally arrived, the coroner issued an unusual instruction to Richard. The coffin must remain sealed. For everyone's safety, he had said cryptically, refusing to elaborate. The ceremony was simple, attended by a handful of friends, neighbors, and family members. The air was heavy with grief, yet whispers of suspicion stirred among the attendees. Why was the coffin closed? Why had Martha's death been so sudden and unexplained? Richard stood stoically by, avoiding eye contact and clutching Matilda's hand. The little girl remained quiet, her gaze fixed on her mother's photograph. But as the eulogies concluded, Matilda suddenly rose from her seat. Her voice, high and piercing, shattered the silence. "Mommy is alive," she screamed, pointing to the photograph. "She's not in there. She's alive. And I saw her." The room froze. All eyes turned to the child as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Richard's face went pale as he hurried to calm his daughter, but Matilda wrenched herself free, tears streaming down her face. "You're lying. All of you are lying. I hate you," she shouted before running out of the room. A child's conviction. Detective Taylor Rowland, an old friend of Richard's, had attended the funeral out of loyalty. Though they hadn't spoken in years, he couldn't ignore the peculiar circumstances surrounding Martha's death. Matilda's outburst only deepened his curiosity. Later that evening, Taylor sat with Matilda while Richard tried to collect himself. He spoke gently, attempting to understand her claims. "Matilda, can you tell me why you think your mommy is alive?" Matilda hesitated but then spoke with a conviction that startled the detective. "I saw her, Mr. Rowland. 2 days ago. She was outside my window. She smiled at me, but she didn't come inside. Daddy wasn't home. I know it was her." "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Taylor asked, leaning forward. "Sometimes when we miss someone, our minds play tricks on us." Matilda shook her head firmly. "I'm not lying. She follows me sometimes too. She wears a hat and dark clothes, but I know it's her. Mommy would never leave me." Taylor's professional instincts kicked in. Matilda's descriptions were vivid and consistent. Could there be truth to her story? Secrets unveiled. Taylor convinced Richard to let him investigate further. They began retracing Martha's last steps, starting with the woods where she had reportedly gone jogging. Among the fallen leaves and winding trails, Taylor found a discarded scarf. It was unmistakably Martha's, yet it looked as though it had been left there deliberately. Meanwhile, Matilda continued to insist she had seen her mother. One evening, while returning from piano class, she pointed out a figure in the distance. "That's her," she cried. Taylor gave chase, but the person disappeared into the shadows before he could get close. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place when Taylor revisited the coroner. The man's nervous demeanor and evasive answers only heightened his suspicions. With a court order, Taylor demanded the reopening of Martha's file. What he discovered left him speechless. Martha's body had never been properly identified. Instead, the report relied on circumstantial evidence and a rushed conclusion. The truth emerges. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Taylor pressed the coroner for answers. Under intense questioning, the man finally broke down. He confessed that he had been coerced into fabricating the report. Martha had been taken, not by death, but by a shadowy organization targeting individuals with certain rare traits. She had been declared dead to cover up her disappearance. Armed with this revelation, Taylor rallied a team to locate Martha. The trail led them to an isolated facility on the outskirts of the city. In a dramatic rescue, they found Martha alive but weak, held against her will. The reunion between mother and daughter was tearful and joyous, a testament to the power of love and determination. A lesson in hope. The ordeal left scars, but it also brought the family closer. Martha's resilience and Matilda's unwavering belief in her mother's survival inspired everyone who heard their story. Richard learned to trust his instincts and cherish the moments he had with his loved ones, while Taylor's dedication to justice reinforced the importance of fighting for what's right. As the Stevens family began to heal, Matilda's words echoed in their hearts. "Mommy would never leave me." Her faith had been the key to unraveling a conspiracy and bringing her family back together. The story of Matilda and her mother became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the truth has a way of coming to light, and love can overcome any obstacle. The unanswered questions. The day of the funeral was overcast, the skies mirroring the somber mood that enveloped the Stevens family. Despite the weight of his grief, Richard worked tirelessly to ensure that the ceremony was as Martha would have wanted, simple, respectful, and attended only by those closest to her. But there was a glaring oddity no one could ignore. The coffin remained sealed. Neighbors whispered their suspicions in hushed tones. Some speculated that Martha had suffered from a rare illness, while others suggested an accident had left her unrecognizable. Still, there were those who found the entire situation unsettling. Why hadn't Richard insisted on seeing his wife's body? Why hadn't there been any clarity from the coroner? The mystery around Martha's death cast a shadow over the ceremony. Richard, oblivious to the rumors swirling around him, clung tightly to Matilda's hand as they sat in the front row. His grief had muted his ability to process the whispers, though they seemed to linger in the air like an unspoken accusation. The stranger's warning. The day before the funeral, Richard had received a peculiar phone call from Dr. Edwin Brooks, the coroner. His voice was curt, with an edge of urgency that made Richard sit up in alarm. "Mr. Stevens, under no circumstances are you to open the coffin during the ceremony. Do you understand? It is imperative," Brooks had said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Why?" Richard asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "What are you not telling me? Is there something wrong with the body?" Brooks hesitated for a long moment before replying. "It's for your safety, Mr. Stevens. Trust me, this is for the greater good." The line went dead before Richard could probe further, leaving him with more questions than answers. What could possibly be so dangerous about his wife's body? The thought gnawed at him through the night, but his exhaustion eventually forced him into a restless sleep. The ceremony. As the eulogies began, Matilda remained uncharacteristically quiet. Her wide, curious eyes darted between the coffin and her mother's photograph, which sat perched on an easel surrounded by flowers. Her small hands gripped the hem of her black dress tightly, and her lips pressed into a thin line. A few of Martha's friends spoke fondly of her kindness, her laughter, and her unyielding love for her family. The words should have brought comfort, but Matilda's unease only grew. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't put it into words. As the final speaker, a neighbor who had often joined Martha for morning coffee, wrapped up her tearful goodbye, Matilda suddenly stood. Her small frame seemed to tremble as she pointed at her mother's photograph. "Mommy isn't in there," she declared, her voice quivering but loud enough to echo through the room. The crowd turned to her in stunned silence, their faces etched with confusion. Richard froze, his heart sinking. Before he could stop her, Matilda's voice grew louder, more insistent. She's alive. I saw her. You're all lying to me," she screamed, her voice breaking into sobs. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, whispers breaking out like wildfire. Some looked at Richard with pity, assuming Matilda's grief had taken hold of her imagination. Others seemed unnerved, glancing toward the sealed coffin with suspicion. Richard crouched beside his daughter, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Matilda, sweetheart, please, we talked about this. Mommy is in heaven," he said, his voice cracking. But Matilda pulled away, her tear-streaked face full of defiance. "You're wrong, Daddy. I saw her. I know it was her," she cried before bolting from the room. The aftermath of her words. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier. Some guests tried to console Richard, while others avoided him entirely, their unease evident. Rumors had already begun to swirl. Speculations about foul play, cover-ups, and scandalous secrets. Richard could feel their eyes on him, their judgment cutting through his grief. Among the attendees, Detective Taylor Rowland sat quietly in the back row. Though he had come simply to support his old friend, Matilda's outburst stirred his curiosity. He had spent years as an investigator and knew better than to dismiss a child's words outright. As the ceremony drew to a close, Richard stood at the front of the room, his shoulders sagging with the weight of the day. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice shaky. "But I need to end the ceremony here. The burial will be held privately." The murmurs died down as the guests filed out, leaving Richard alone with the coffin. He stared at it, his hands trembling. Could Matilda be right? Was there something more to Martha's death than he'd been led to believe? A friend returns. Just as Richard began to spiral into his thoughts, Taylor approached him. "Richard," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "I know today isn't the time for questions, but I think you need to let me help." Richard looked at him, his expression weary. "Taylor, I don't know what's happening. Matilda keeps saying she's seen her mother, and I don't know what to believe anymore." Taylor placed a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder. "Let me investigate. If there's anything strange going on, we'll find out. And if it's just Matilda's way of coping, we'll help her through it. Either way, you deserve answers." For the first time in days, Richard felt a glimmer of hope. Though the mysteries surrounding Martha's death seemed insurmountable, he realized he didn't have to face them alone. Shadows of truth. Detective Taylor Rowland didn't waste time. The day after the funeral, he began piecing together what little information Richard had shared about Martha's death. It wasn't much, just a call from the hospital, a vague explanation of a heart attack while jogging, and the coroner's cryptic instructions about the sealed coffin. But Taylor knew that mysteries often unraveled with a single loose thread, and Matilda's insistence that her mother was alive felt like a tug on that thread. Taylor began his investigation by revisiting the woods where Martha had reportedly gone jogging on the day of her death. The area was quiet, lined with tall oaks whose bare branches swayed gently in the winter breeze. He scoured the trail, scanning for anything out of the ordinary. After hours of searching, he found something, a scarf tangled in the brambles. It was a deep burgundy, the exact shade of Martha's favorite winter scarf, and it was oddly clean, as if it hadn't been there for long. Taylor bagged the scarf as evidence, though it wasn't enough to draw conclusions. He needed more. Witnesses, records, something concrete. He also needed to speak with Matilda, who, despite her young age, had become the linchpin of his investigation. Matilda's story. When Taylor returned to the Steakins household that evening, he found Matilda sitting in her room, her face pressed against the glass of her window. She turned when he knocked gently on the door. "Hi, Mr. Rowland," she said softly. "Are you here to ask about Mommy again?" Taylor nodded and pulled a chair beside her. "Only if you're ready to talk, Matilda. I want to help you, your daddy, and your mommy too." Matilda hesitated, but eventually spoke. "I saw her again today," she whispered, her voice trembling. She was wearing a cap and dark clothes, just like before. She stood by the big tree near school and watched me. "I know it's her," She smiled at me. "Did you tell anyone?" Taylor asked. Matilda shook her head. "Nobody believes me. They say I'm imagining things because I'm sad. But I'm not lying, Mr. Rowland. Mommy wouldn't just leave me." Taylor studied her face, searching for any hint of fabrication, but Matilda's wide, earnest eyes and steady voice left no doubt. She believed every word she was saying. And if she was right, it meant Martha wasn't dead. "Matilda," Taylor said gently, "when you see her, does she ever say anything? Or does she just stand there?" "She doesn't talk. She just looks at me," Matilda said, her brow furrowed in thought. "But last time, she put her finger to her lips like this." Matilda mimicked a shushing gesture. It was like she didn't want anyone to know she was there. Taylor's mind raced. If Martha was alive and deliberately staying hidden, there had to be a reason. Someone, or something, was keeping her away. But who? And why? The coroner's secret. The next morning, Taylor paid an unannounced visit to the coroner, Dr. Edwin Brooks. The man looked startled when he opened the door to find Taylor standing on his porch. "Detective Rowland," Brooks stammered, his face pale. "What brings you here?" "Just tying up some loose ends in the case of Martha Stevens," Taylor said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I've got some questions, and I think you're the only one who can answer them." Brooks fidgeted nervously. "I already told Mr. Stevens everything he needed to know. It was a heart attack, a tragic, sudden heart attack." "Was it?" Taylor asked, his tone sharp. "Because her daughter says she's seen her mother alive, and something about this whole case doesn't sit right with me. For starters, why the sealed coffin?" Brooks swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the door, as if contemplating an escape. I was just following protocol," he said, his voice shaking. "There were complications with the body. It wasn't safe to open the coffin." "Complications?" Taylor pressed. "What kind of complications, doctor?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like someone wanted to make sure nobody saw what or who was in that coffin." Brooks collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. "I didn't have a choice," he muttered. "They came to me, 2 men in suits. They said it was a matter of national security. They told me to declare her dead, seal the coffin, and keep my mouth shut." "Who are they?" Taylor demanded. "I don't know," Brooks cried. "They didn't give names. They said if I didn't cooperate, there'd be consequences for me and my family. I didn't ask questions. I was too scared." Taylor's jaw tightened. It was clear now that Martha's death had been staged, but the question remained, why? What could Martha have possibly known or done that warranted such extreme measures? The shadowy pursuit. Taylor returned to the Stevens house to share what he had learned. Richard was stunned, but Matilda's face lit up with hope. "I told you, Daddy," she said, her voice triumphant. "I told you Mommy wasn't gone." "Matilda, sweetheart, we're closer to finding Mommy," Taylor said, kneeling to meet her gaze. "But I need your help. Can you show me exactly where you saw her? Every spot where she's appeared." Matilda nodded eagerly. The next day, she led Taylor to the tree near her school, the piano studio she attended, and the small park near their house. At each location, Taylor noticed subtle signs: disturbed soil, footprints, and even scraps of fabric caught on branches that suggested someone had indeed been there recently. As they walked home, Taylor noticed a black sedan parked a few houses down from the Stevens residence. The windows were tinted, and the engine idled quietly. His instincts flared. They were being watched. A step closer. Taylor's investigation was yielding results, but it also raised more questions. Who were the men in suits? What had they wanted with Martha? And was she truly safe, or was she in danger even now? One thing was certain. Matilda's unwavering belief in her mother had been the catalyst for uncovering a web of lies. Taylor vowed to follow every lead, no matter how perilous, to reunite the family and uncover the truth. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, Matilda looked out her window once more, her small face illuminated by the glow of the streetlights. "Good night, Mommy," she whispered, her voice filled with both sadness and hope. "I'll see you soon." Little did she know, the search for her mother was about to take a dramatic and dangerous turn. The truth revealed. Taylor's investigation had reached a tipping point. The evidence pointed to a sinister plot, but he needed one final push to bring the truth to light. With the information from the coroner, Matilda's sightings, and the suspicious black sedan that seemed to trail the Stevens family, Taylor suspected a conspiracy larger than anyone could have imagined. One evening, Taylor decided to set a trap. Using himself as bait, he parked near the Stevens home and waited for the black sedan to appear. Sure enough, it arrived, idling at the end of the street. Taylor stepped out of his car, walked toward it, and knocked on the driver's window. The man inside looked startled but rolled down the glass just an inch. "Evening," Taylor said, his tone firm but calm. "I think you've been following my friends and me. Care to explain?" The man hesitated before muttering, "I'm just doing my job." "Who hired you?" Taylor asked. When the man didn't respond, Taylor leaned closer. "You can either tell me now, or we can have this conversation down at the station." Reluctantly, the man handed Taylor a card with the company name and phone number. "I was hired to monitor the house. That's all I know," he said before driving off. The card led Taylor to a private security firm that had ties to a government agency. With a few more calls and a lot of persistence, he learned that Martha had been taken because she was inadvertently tied to a classified program involving a groundbreaking medical trial. She had been part of a research study years ago and was believed to have developed antibodies that could revolutionize healthcare. But instead of seeking her cooperation, those overseeing the program had decided to remove her quietly, fearing public exposure. The rescue. Taylor worked with a trusted contact in law enforcement to organize a raid on the facility where Martha was being held. It was a risky operation, but Taylor's determination and evidence convinced his team to act swiftly. Late one night, they stormed the facility. Inside, they found Martha alive but weak. She had been kept under constant surveillance and told her family would be harmed if she tried to escape. Tears streamed down her face as she saw Taylor. "Is Matilda okay?" was her first question. "She's safe, and she's been waiting for you," Taylor assured her. Martha broke down, relief washing over her. "I never stopped hoping," she whispered. A tearful reunion. When Martha returned home, Matilda was the first to see her. The little girl froze in disbelief before running into her mother's arms. I told them you were alive," Matilda cried, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "You did, my brave girl," Martha said, holding her tightly. "You saved me." Richard joined them, tears streaming down his face. He hugged them both, overwhelmed with gratitude. For the first time in weeks, their home was filled with love and laughter. As the family began to heal, they reflected on their journey. Matilda's unwavering belief in her mother had sparked a chain of events that exposed a dangerous conspiracy. Richard learned the importance of asking questions and trusting his instincts, even in moments of despair. Taylor reminded everyone that courage and persistence could uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Martha, though shaken by her ordeal, found strength in her family's love. She vowed to use her experience to advocate for transparency and accountability, ensuring that no one else would suffer as she had. As Matilda sat on her mother's lap one evening, she looked up and asked, "Mommy, why did this happen to us?" Martha thought for a moment before replying. "Sometimes bad things happen because people make wrong choices, but when we stand together, believe in each other, and fight for what's right, we can make the world a better place." Matilda nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad you came back. I knew you wouldn't leave me." "I never will, sweetheart," Martha said, kissing her forehead. "Not ever." Closing message. The Stevens family story became a symbol of hope and resilience. It taught the world that love, faith, and determination could overcome even the darkest of times. Most importantly, it reminded everyone that truth always has a way of coming to light, no matter how deeply it is buried. The story left a lasting lesson: never give up on the people you love, and always fight for what is right, even when the odds seem impossible. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.